Ashley Zhou was born on December 30th, 2011, bringing with her the hope of a bright future. She was a charming little girl with lovely black hair, sparkling eyes, and a cute button nose that reflected her innocent youth. However, Ashley's life was not without its challenges. Her parents, Mingming Chun and Liang Zhou, ran Eng's Asian Cuisine, a restaurant in North Canton. The demanding nature of their business left them with scant time and energy for their two daughters. As the weight of the restaurant took its toll, and caring for baby Ashley became increasingly challenging, her parents decided to send Ashley to live with her paternal grandmother in New York. This choice was made to ensure that Ashley received the attention and care she deserved, even if it meant being separated from her parents and older sister, Jojo. During her time with her grandparents, however, Ashley began showing signs of significant developmental delay, struggling to keep pace with her peers. By the time Ashley returned home to Ohio in October 2015, her condition had worsened by years of neglect and lack of essential nurturing. She was ill-prepared for the world and emotionally and developmentally behind, but at least she was back home where she belonged, reunited with her parents and sister. Ashley's parents, Mingming Chen and Liang Zhou, shared a common Chinese background, although they grew up in different countries. Reconstructing their journey, based on information available in court documents and immigration records, reveals a young couple determined to succeed and live the American dream. Mingming was born and raised in China, where her spiritual journey as a young woman led her to finding solace and purpose in the practice of Falun Gong, also known as Falun Dafa. Falun Gong is a spiritual discipline that combines meditation, exercises, and moral teachings based on the principles of truthfulness, compassion, and forbearance. It emerged in the early 1990s in China and quickly gained popularity, attracting millions of followers who sought inner peace and spiritual enlightenment. Falun Gong faced persecution from the Chinese government, as it was viewed as a threat to the authority of the Chinese Communist Party, CCP. The movement's rapid growth and independent nature raised concerns within the CCP about its influence and ability to mobilize people, while its spiritual teachings, emphasized personal values and spiritual growth, were seen as competing with the CCP's ideology. As a result, the Chinese government launched a systematic crackdown of Falun Gong practitioners, including arrest, detention, forced labor, torture, and allegations of organ harvesting. Mingming lived in constant fear, aware of her devotion to Falun Gong, made her vulnerable to punishment by the authorities, who justified their persecution through demonizing propaganda. She was forced to flee China in August 2008 and reportedly paid $68,000 to a human smuggler to sneak her into the United States through the Mexican border, concealed in a car. In early 2009, she applied for asylum. According to Mingming's statements to the U.S. immigration authorities, she was a former elementary school teacher in China and had turned to Falun Gong as a means to cope with insomnia caused by job-related stress. However, she was arrested by the police in April 2008. She claimed that the police had conducted a raid on her home and detained her for a month, where she was mistreated by the authorities and even beaten with a baton. Mingming had to finally sign a statement, renouncing her practice of Falun Gong to secure her release. However, the credibility of her story was questioned by immigration officials due to inconsistencies, and her asylum application was denied. Despite multiple appeals, a judge ordered Mingming's removal from the U.S. in late 2009, and her case was declined for further review in 2012. Meanwhile, Mingming and Liang's paths intertwined amid the hustle and bustle of his sister's restaurant in New York. Leon was helping his sister in the restaurant, when in the midst of the culinary chaos, his eyes met the enchanting gaze of Mingming Chun, who was also part of the restaurant staff. Within those shared moments of hard work and dedication, an undeniable spark ignited. They fell deeply in love and got married. In the summer of 2011, the couple moved to Stark County, Ohio, to embark on a courageous venture. Nestled on Portage Street in North Canton, they opened the doors to Eng's Asian Cuisine, introducing Chinese culinary flavors to the local community. Mingming and Liang were the sole employees and worked tirelessly 6 days a week as customers began to frequent the place. During this time, their family expanded. Jojo was born in October 2010, followed by Ashley in December 2011. But 5 years later, the American dream was shattered when Ashley went missing. On the bitterly cold winter night of January 9, 2017, Liang Zhou called 911 in a panic just as the clock struck 9 p.m. His trembling voice pierced through the emergency line, desperately seeking help to find his missing daughter. Liang reported that Ashley had vanished from the back room of Eng's Asian Cuisine, their restaurant in North Canton. Mingming and Liang, consumed by the demands of their long hours of work, often brought Ashley along to the establishment. She would spend her time in the back room, alternating between sleep and playful exploration. On that fateful day, Liang recounted bringing Ashley to the restaurant at 4 p.m. as the daylight faded and gently laying her down in the quiet refuge of the back room. As the hours ticked by, a relentless blizzard set in. Liang told the 911 operator that when Mingming stepped into the back room after wrapping up work, Ashley was nowhere to be found. They were worried that their little girl, would not been dressed for the bitter cold, had wandered outside into the violent blizzard. Law enforcement swiftly responded to the distressing call. Minutes felt like eternity as police vehicles screeched to a halt outside Eng's Asian Cuisine. Determined to find young Ashley, the investigators set out into the frozen expanse surrounding the restaurant. The blizzard raged on with the low hitting 6 degrees, making the search all the more perilous. Bringing with them a diverse arsenal of tools, the Jackson Township Police, led by Chief Mark Brink, spared no expense in their quest to find the missing girl. 9 units darted through the snow, hunting for any scent that might lead them to Ashley. Cherry pickers towering high above the ground scoured rooftops in neighboring areas for a glimpse of the child or any sign of her presence. Technology became a vital ally in the search as the investigators employed drones to survey the area from above. Yet, despite the exhaustive efforts and treacherous sub-zero conditions, the search yielded no trace of the missing girl. By the morning of January 10th, the Jackson Township Police issued a missing child advisory for the entire state of Ohio. Since the outdoors had yielded no clues, investigators turned their attention back to the very heart of the mystery, the confines of Eng's Asian Cuisine. With meticulous precision, they combed through every inch of the restaurant, and it was within those familiar walls that they discovered the devastating truth. Ashley had never left the sanctuary of the restaurant. In a hidden storage area concealed within the ceiling, detectives stumbled upon a sign that would forever haunt their memories. In a massive salt container concealed under layers of salt, they discovered the lifeless body of 5-year-old Ashley. Ashley's parents, Mingming and Liang, seemed crushed at the news, and their initial reaction mirrored the anguish and grief that any parent would feel upon the devastating loss of a child. But amid the sea of tears and despair, a lingering doubt began to creep into the minds of the detectives. The authorities couldn't help but notice inconsistencies in Mingming and Liang's reactions. Their grief at times appeared staged, the expressions forced. The police, seasoned in their intuition, began to question the authenticity of the parents' emotions, noting the discrepancy between their outward display of sorrow and the unsettling reality that Ashley's body had been concealed within their own establishment. The once devoted parents, now entangled in the web of suspicion, became the focus of intense scrutiny and were taken in for questioning. As Mingming sat in the interrogation room, her expression remained eerily devoid of emotion, her face a mask that betrayed none of the grief one would expect from a mother who had just lost her child. The investigator, keenly aware of the stark contrast between her stoic demeanor and the gravity of the situation, wasted no time in confronting her with the chilling reality. "Mingming, your daughter is dead. Your daughter is dead. I just don't understand," the investigator stated, his voice heavy with disbelief and accusation. "I know that you're not crying. You said I don't have anything left. Isn't that what you told me? You don't have any tears left. You don't have nothing left. Mingming, your daughter is dead." Mingming sat there in silence, her eyes fixed on a distant point as if lost in her own thoughts. Pressed on, his voice laden with urgency and an underlying sense of dread. "What happened to Ashley? How did she die?" he asked. "I killed her." Mingming finally spoke, her voice devoid of any discernible emotion. The detective, taken aback by the stark confession, pressed on. "Did you hit her?" he asked. Ming Ming nodded, her face fixated on the table before her. Yeah. And I asked my husband to take care of it. In the midst of this chilling confession, Ming Ming's detached demeanor remained unchanged. There were no tears, no remorse, only a spine-chilling calmness. As the conversation delved deeper into the dark recesses of her mind, she said something that disturbed the investigators further. I need to take care of everything from the restaurant. I only have 2 hands, Ming Ming confessed, her words dripping with horrifying nonchalance. I don't want to do that to Ashley, but you can't control yourself sometimes. In the grim aftermath of Ming Ming's shocking confession, the investigation turned its attention to Liang Zhao. Through chilling interrogation tapes, a harrowing picture began to emerge, shedding light on the deep-seated abuse and tragic offense that unfolded within the Zhou household. Liang Chao recounted the disturbing sequence of offense that unfolded on that fateful day. He revealed that Ming Ming harbored anger toward Ashley due to her inability to be fully toilet-trained when Ashley accidentally soiled herself at home. Ming Ming's rage and frustration boiled over, and she resorted to violence. Liang disclosed that his wife forcefully struck Ashley's head against the carpet not once but twice. As a result of the brutal assault, condition rapidly deteriorated. She began gasping for air and subsequently vomited green bile. A panic-stricken Liang tried to clean up his daughter and attempted cardiopulmonary resuscitation or CPR, hoping to miraculously revive her. However, his efforts proved futile, and Ashley slipped away, leaving him engulfed in panic and despair. Fearing the worst, the couple hastily hatched a macabre plan. Liang believed that Jojo, being only 6 years old, would not be able to tell that Ashley was dead and would assume she was only sleeping, indirectly providing a false alibi for her parents. He explained that their intention was to make it seem like Ashley had left through the back door of the restaurant. Liang admitted to later moving Ashley's body to the storage walk-in freezer to prevent any odors using a bussing container typically used for collecting dirty dishes. During the interview, Liang admitted to their plan to hide the body had been driven by the fear that his wife, Ming Ming, would be discovered living illegally in the United States. Desperate to avoid Ming Ming's deportation and to protect their family from the dire consequences of their actions, they contemplating disposing of Ashley's body once the search for her had ceased. However, they were caught off guard by the lengths the police went to in looking for Ashley. Liang admitted they had not known about the procedures, polygraph tests, and interrogations that would follow the 911 call, nor had he anticipated such an extensive search effort involving numerous people. He expressed remorse and apologized. During the interrogation, Liang unveiled more distressing details about Ashley's upbringing. He confessed that Ashley had not been under their care during her early years and was instead sent to live with Liang's mother in New York until she turned 4, so that Liang and Ming Ming could focus on their burgeoning business. It was upon Ashley's return to their custody that the cycle of abuse began. He spoke of how Ashley's actions, stemming from neglect and developmental delays, were perceived as a defiance, with their haunting dialogues and chilling admissions painted a harrowing portrait of a family marred by abuse, anger, and the ultimate betrayal of a parent's duty to protect their child. The horrors that poor Ashley suffered at the hands of the very people who were supposed to love her the most forever etched this case into the annals of unimaginable human cruelty. This gruesome crime scene left the Jackson Township community in a state of disbelief and sorrow. Customers and neighbors who had interacted with Ming Ming and Liang expressed shock that the parents had killed their own daughter with such violence. The family had resided in a top-floor apartment in a building near Interstate 77, and none of the neighbors had witnessed any negative moments between Ashley and her parents. Kirk Clusty, a resident in the same building, described them as good people who looked so nice. However, the family was known to be private, preferring to channel all their hard work and dedication toward running their restaurant without recalled seeing the girls in the restaurant while their parents worked. Ashley and Jojo would often play with crayons or on a tablet together. Customers who had interacted with the girls described them as polite and inquisitive. Ashley's tragic death led to an outpouring of support from the community. Meanwhile, her body was cremated and the ashes handed over to relatives in New York. Her older sister Jojo, grappling with the sudden absence of both Ashley and her parents, was placed in the custody of the Stark County's Child Welfare Agency. A memorial was set up outside the restaurant to honor Ashley's memory. People from across the county visited to pay their respects and left piles of stuffed toys, candles, and balloons. The community rallied together to mourn the violent end of such a young life, leaving a void in their hearts. The trial began with a preliminary hearing on January 19, 2017 at the Stark County Courthouse. In the solemn atmosphere of the courtroom, 35-year-old Liang Zhou stood before the judge, his voice quivering with emotion and eyes brimming with tears. As the events leading up to 5-year-old Ashley's death were reconstructed, his 29-year-old wife, Mingming, sat poker-faced throughout the proceedings, interacting only with her interpreter. Court documents revealed that Ashley's parents were accused of abusing her on multiple occasions, starting from the time she moved in with them in October 2015 until her death over a year later. In September 2017, Liang, a U.S. citizen, reached a plea agreement with county prosecutors. He pleaded guilty to 2 counts of endangering children, both second-degree felonies. One count was related to the events surrounding Ashley's death, while the other was linked to previous instances of abuse inflicted upon the young girl. In addition to the charges of endangering children, Liang pleaded guilty to tampering with evidence, obstructing justice, and gross abuse of a corpse, all serious felonies. The murder charge against Liang was dismissed in exchange for testifying against Mingming. The Stark County Prosecutor's Office revealed that Liang did not directly cause the injuries that led to Ashley's death on January 9, 2017. He was fully aware of Mingming's physical abuse toward the child in the months preceding her untimely death. Assistant Stark County Prosecutor Tony Schellinger noted that there was no evidence indicating that Liang had personally abused Ashley on the day of her death or any previous point. Defense attorney Joseph Gorman, who represented Liang, acknowledged his client's failure to protect Ashley and his panic attempt to keep his family intact, resulting in the poor decision to cover up his wife's crimes. Liang had already lost his child, and with Mingming's impending prison term, he was attempting to safeguard what remained. Nevertheless, the couple's actions spoke volumes. Liang had helped Mingming to deceitfully lie to the police and had himself reported Ashley as missing. These calculated falsehoods led Stark County Common Pleas Judge Marissa Hartnett to hand down a 12-year prison sentence to Liang on January 10, 2018. Judge Hartnett acknowledged the terrible choices made by both parents. Addressing Liang directly, she emphasized that though he did not directly cause Ashley's death, his decisions compounded the tragedy. Expressing empathy, she noted that had he made different choices, he could have had the chance to be there for their surviving daughter. As Liang addressed the court, his voice trembled with grief and regret. He shared that Ashley's 6th birthday had just passed 2 weeks prior, emphasizing the profound void left in his heart. "It goes without saying that I wish the situation was different," he murmured, his words punctuated by somber pauses. "And no one's going to remember her. No one but the people in my family. I don't want to be rude, but none of you remember her. None of you." Mingming Chun was originally charged with murder, but had it reduced to involuntary manslaughter by reason of insanity. The Stark County Prosecutor's Office clarified that Ashley's murder was not premeditated, and due to this, Mingming did not qualify for the death penalty. In a press release, Stark County Prosecuting Attorney John D. Ferrero described the tragic incident as an act of anger committed by a mother who had never formed a bond with her child, since she had not raised her since infancy. He noted that Ashley was more of a burden than a blessing to Mingming. During the police interrogation, Mingming had described Ashley as defiant, saying she would push her sister when she didn't get her way. But Schellinger clarified that there was no evidence indicating that Ashley had shown any disciplinary problems. According to Mingming's defense attorney, Richard Drucker, the stress of managing the family's restaurant in Jackson Township, which operated almost around the clock, led to Mingming's violence against Ashley. Drucker acknowledged that Ashley's death was the tragic consequence of this violence. He also expressed Mingming's deep sorrow over the loss of her child and appealed for forgiveness on her behalf. During the court hearing, an interpreter also read a brief statement on Mingming's behalf, expressing her remorse for what happened to her daughter and voicing her desire to become a better person. Mingming pleaded guilty to involuntary manslaughter and other charges related to the death of her daughter, and was sentenced to 22 years in prison. Her sentence includes 11 years for the involuntary manslaughter charge, 8 years for one count of endangering children, and 3 years for tampering with evidence, the maximum prison sentence for each offense. Since she had been living in the country illegally, it is anticipated that she will be deported to China after serving her 22-year prison term. Reflecting on the plea agreements, Schellinger stated that they were the best resolution for the case, given the tragic circumstances and the need to protect Ashley's surviving sister, JoJo. She characterized the case as a heart-wrenching tragedy in which a mother took the life of her daughter while the father failed to shield the child from harm. The tragic story of the Zhou family depicts the devastating consequences of using violence to discipline a child. The entire family was torn apart when Ashley lost her life and both parents were sent to prison. It is evident that Mingming Chen and Liang Zhao were overwhelmed and burnout, struggling to handle the continuous demands of running a restaurant. The pressures they faced in their daily lives might have prevented them from treating Ashley with patience and care she deserved. This exhaustion and the absence of a strong bond between mother and daughter likely contributed to the tragic events that unfolded. Adding to the complexity of the situation, reports suggest that Ashley had developmental delays, making her even more vulnerable to abuse. Children with such challenges often require additional support, understanding, and patience from their caregivers. Unfortunately, the circumstances within the Zhou family seem to have exacerbated these vulnerabilities, leading to a tragic outcome. Presently, Ashley's sister, JoJo, resides with relatives in New York, while her temporary custody falls under the jurisdiction of Stark County Job and Family Services. It is imperative that all involved parties work diligently to offer necessary resources and assistance to help JoJo navigate the profound trauma she has endured. As we bring this tragic case to a close, we are left with a profound sense of sorrow for the loss of young Ashley and the pain inflicted upon her. Before we proceed, I've got an exciting surprise for you. We've launched a brand new channel dedicated to intriguing content such as old historical mysteries, cold cases, and particularly chilling horror stories perfect for bedtime. Drop a comment letting us know if you're a fan of horror stories or not. You can find the link in the description below. Let's find out who will be the first to explore it. Alright, let's dive back into the video. On November 3, 1993, 40-year-old Cara Vaughn departed from her family home in Point Place, a neighborhood in Natchitoches Parish, Louisiana, between 8 and 9 p.m. She was said to be upset when she left. Cara drove away in her white 1978 Honda Civic. She had only about $10 with her and lacked the medication necessary for her diabetes. When she failed to return home, her family reported her as missing. Authorities spent months trying to locate Cara and her vehicle, interviewing her friends, performing searches, and entering information both about her and her car into investigative databases in hopes that another law enforcement agency would find the vehicle or make contact with Cara. According to Cara's family, she was troubled and had previously threatened to drive her car into Cane River Lake so that she could never be found. Cane River Lake was therefore searched on several occasions shortly after Cara's disappearance. In 2007, the East Baton Rouge Police Sheriff's Office offered to help with a new search for Cara with the more advanced sonar equipment they now had. This search, like all the ones that came before it, failed to locate Cara or her vehicle. Cara's family continued searching for her in the years that followed, never giving up hope that Cara had run off but would eventually be found. Cara's mother, Mildred, passed away in January of 2012 without ever knowing what happened to her daughter. Cara's sister, Lynn Vaughn, was an anchor for CNN headline news from 1984 until 1998, and then a contributing reporter for CBS 46. After nearly 3 decades of looking for answers about her sister, Lynn prayed to God, asking him to allow her sister's case to be solved before she died. She wanted someone in their family to know what became of Cara within their lifetime. It would not be long after Lynn made this plea that Cara's case would finally be solved. In February of 2021, 20-year-old Ben Abraham, a member of the fishing team at Northwestern State University, went fishing with his friend, Zach Gagnard, a fishing guide on Cane River Lake. Ben had often fished at the location near the 1300 block of Bermuda Road with his father when he was young. Ben and Zach had been using soda or equipment while they fished. They noticed on the screen what they initially thought might be a four-wheeler or a lawnmower submerged under the water. They returned to the spot later and were able to obtain a much clearer image. They feared the object may have been a vehicle. Zach sent the image from his sonar screen and the coordinates where the image was taken to one of his cousins, whose father worked for the sheriff's office. A winter storm prevented the sheriff's office from following up on the lead immediately, but dive teams went into the water to investigate on March 12th. It was impossible to see through the murky water, so the divers had to perform a touch search, but they did locate what felt like a vehicle. The Calcasieu Parish Sheriff's Office had more specialized equipment that would make examining the vehicle possible, and their marine unit and dive team with all of its windows rolled up. They were able to see Civic with all of its windows rolled up. They were able to see inside and saw a skeleton. They broke one of the windows despite their time underwater. The cards both belonged, despite their time underwater. The cards both belonged to Carol Vaughn. Authorities were able to remove the vehicle from the water, and the remains found inside of it were sent to the Louisiana State University Forensic Anthropology and Computer Enhanced Services Laboratory. The laboratory was able to confirm that the remains were those of Cara Vaughn. Cara's sister, Lynn, was of course heartbroken that Cara was no longer alive, but grateful to finally have answers and relieved that Cara did not appear to have met with foul play. Cara will be buried near her mother in Natchitoches. Taisha Bell was a loving mother of two daughters, ages 1.5 and 5. In 2003, 22-year-old Taisha was living in Aurora, Illinois, sharing an apartment with her sister. Late in the evening one night in May of 2003, over Mother's Day weekend, Taisha's sister overheard Taisha receive a phone call and then step outside of their shared apartment. Taisha never came back inside. Her family spent a full day trying to get in contact with her, leaving more than 50 messages on her voicemail. Later checks of her cell phone records would show that Taisha had never received any of them, as she had last checked her voicemail the morning prior to her disappearance. Taisha was reported missing to the police. There were no indications that Taisha had planned to be outside for more than a few minutes. Her two daughters were left inside with relatives. Her television was on, and she had left candles burning in her bedroom. Her purse, identification, and cash were also left inside of the day before she went missing. Taisha had gone shopping to buy summer clothes for her younger daughter. Police identified a person of interest early on in their investigation, but no arrest was made. They also conducted several searches, but found no evidence that led them to Taisha. After Taisha went missing, her two daughters went to live with Taisha's mother, Lorna Smith, who raised her granddaughters to understand that their mother would never have left them willingly. The girls wrote poems and made scrapbooks about Taisha throughout their childhood. Laura Smith also has been instrumental in keeping her daughter's case active with the Aurora police and featured in the media. She drove around with flyers featuring Taisha's picture and information in the window of her car and contacted the Chicago Tribune every year near the anniversary of Taisha's disappearance to get ongoing coverage of her daughter's case. She also raised $10,000 to offer as a reward for information in the case. Lorna feared that her daughter had been killed when she went missing, but she turned to her faith to get her through the years without answers about Taisha and give her some measure of hope. Until I get a knock at my door and police tell me they have found my daughter's remains, I will continue to think of her as alive, Lorna told reporter Denise Crosby in 2013. That day unfortunately came in 2021. On December 11, 2020, human remains, along with some personal items and pieces of clothing, were found in a shallow grave in a wooded area of Kane County, Illinois. The personal items did not provide an immediate identification of the individual. After the scene was processed, the remains were taken to the Kane County morgue to be autopsied and tested further. A forensic odontologist and a forensic anthropologist were brought in to help create profiles that could help identify the remains. Genetic material from the remains was also sent to the Illinois State Police Crime Lab to be analyzed, thanks to a DNA profile that was put on file shortly after Taisha went missing. The remains were identified as those of Taisha Bell in early 2021. Aurora police announced the discovery of Taisha's remains and their need for assistance from the public at a press conference on March 16, 2021. While Taisha's disappearance has been solved, the mystery of who took her life still remains. Due to the ongoing investigation into the case, certain details, such as the exact location where Taisha's remains were found and the exact cause of her death, have not been released to the public. However, based on the results of her autopsy, her case has been reclassified as a homicide. Authorities do not yet have enough evidence to make any arrests. Our detectives continue to have theories in Taisha's case, but we need more information before criminal charges can be authorized. According to Aurora Police Jack Fischel, we implore anyone who may have information to please come forward. Ronnie Laite was a 38-year-old postman from Bruges in Belgium. He was the father of 2 children, a 6-year-old son and a 2-year-old daughter. In the summer of 1990, Ronnie abruptly disappeared. He was last seen with his car, a Ford Thomas from the 1980s, which also went missing. Ronnie's marriage to his wife Francine was about to end in divorce. While the couple was legally married, they were separated in practice, with Ronnie spending a few days at a time away from home prior to his disappearance. When he went missing, Francine assumed he had run off with another woman, as he had not always been faithful by the end of their marriage. Given how abruptly Ronnie disappeared, his son Christophe assumed that he must have moved to a different country and assumed a new name. There were limitations to the extent of the investigation into his disappearance, as the missing persons unit of the federal police would not be established until 5 years after Ronnie went missing. Furthermore, traffic cameras and automatic number plate recognition technology commonly used in Belgium now were not in place at the time, and sonar boats that could have been used to systematically search local waterways were not available. Ronnie's case would remain unsolved for more than 3 decades until February of 2021, when a hiker noticed what they feared to be the outline of a vehicle in the Damsevart Canal in Bruges. They notified authorities of their concern. Heavy rains were being forecast for the upcoming, so the water level in the canal had been lowered in order to prevent flooding, allowing the outline of the object divers would later confirm to be a car to become visible. The vehicle was removed from the water and found to be a Ford Taunus from the 1980s, like Ronnie's. The partial number plate still in the front of the car matched the one belonging to Ronnie's car. Several of Ronnie's personal belongings, including his identification documents, were found inside of the vehicle. Human remains, later confirmed to be Ronnie, were also located inside of the vehicle. The investigation into the case will continue, but the local prosecutor's office so far believes, based on current evidence, that Ronnie's death was accidental. Ronnie's children are currently dealing with conflicting emotions following the resolution of their father's case. Ronnie's son, Christophe, told the media after his father's remains were found that while he was relieved to have clarity about why his father disappeared, he now had to process the conflicting feelings of being sad his father was dead, but also feeling happy that he had finally been found. Before we continue, 90% of you haven't subscribed to our channel, so if you like this video, please subscribe. It motivates us to make more content for you. Okay, let's continue. In the 1950s, in the affluent Mission Hills neighborhood of Kansas City, a multimillionaire named Robert Greenlease Sr. had everything one could desire. He was a car dealer with dealerships nationwide and had amassed his fortune by introducing General Motors vehicles to the Great Plains in the early 20th century. On February 3, 1947, at the age of 65, his life transformed with the birth of his son, whom he named Robert Bobby Cosgrove Greenlease Jr. Bobby's mother, Virginia Pollock, was Robert's second wife. The Greenlease family lived in luxury and were devoted to their beloved Bobby. He was not an only child, but he had an elder sister named Virginia, who was born in 1941. He also had a half-brother named Paul, who was born in 1917. Paul was Robert's son from his first marriage. In 1953, at the age of 6, Bobby was attending the prestigious Notre Dame de Seine, a private Catholic school located at 3823 Locust Avenue in Kansas City. There, he learned and grew with his peers. Everything was going fine and the future looked bright for Bobby. However, fate had other plans for the young boy and his family. The morning of September 28, 1953 was like any other day at Bobby's school, Notre Dame de Seine. However, little did anyone know that this day would soon take a tragic turn. At around 11 a.m., Sister Moran, The nun on duty for the day opened the school door and she was greeted by a plump woman, claiming to be Bobby's aunt. The woman explained that the boy's mother, Virginia, had suffered a heart attack while shopping at the county club plaza and had been rushed to St. Mary's Hospital. She went on to say that the Greenlease family had instructed her to take the child to his mother immediately. Without a second thought, Sister Moran went to retrieve Bobby from his classroom. The innocent 6-year-old, trusting of adults, had no reason to question the woman's identity or intentions. As he took the woman's hand, the nun watched as they both got into a cab and drove off. She assumed that everything was in order. Little did anyone know that the woman was not Bobby's aunt, and the events of that day would change the Greenlease family's lives forever. The phone call that Virginia received, less than an hour after Bobby was taken by the unknown woman, was one that would forever haunt her. On the other end of the line was Sister Martha Anna, another nun from Bobby's school, who had called the family's home to inquire about Virginia's supposed heart attack. The nun was, however, stunned to know that nothing of the sort had happened. Virginia was not in the hospital and she had not had a heart attack. It soon dawned on both the nun and Virginia that something sinister was at play here, and it did not take them long to realize that Bobby had been kidnapped. After getting off the phone with Sister Marthana, Virginia immediately contacted her husband, Robert, and explained to him everything that had happened. Robert was also as shocked and bewildered as his wife was. Without wasting time, he contacted the Kansas City Police Department to report the crime. The FBI was also called in to assist with the situation. Panic gripped the city as news of Bobby's kidnapping spread. The authorities launched a massive manhunt for the missing boy, but their efforts were hampered by the fact that they had no leads on the woman who had taken him. As the hours ticked by, hope began to fade. But then, on the same day that Bobby had been taken, his parents received the first of several ransom letters. The letter was signed by someone calling themselves M, and it demanded $600,000 for Bobby's safe return. The amount of money was staggering, equivalent to over $6 million in today's currency. But the demands didn't stop there. M also insisted that the ransom money be paid in small denomination notes of 10s, 20s. The authorities were informed of the ransom letter and they began working tirelessly to track down the mysterious M and secure Bobby's release. The following day, September 29, 1953, brought another ransom letter. This time, the letter came along with a pin that Bobby had been wearing on the day he was kidnapped. Robert, desperate to secure his son's release, decided to go gather the ransom money, and so he reached out to trusted friends and associates for help. One of them was Arthur Eisenhower, the executive vice president at Commerce Trust Company. He was also the brother of the President of the United States at that time. One thing Eisenhower did was to ensure that every bank clerk handling the ransom money made note of the serial numbers on all of the bills. These were later printed in newspapers around the country. The agonizing wait for Bobby's safe return seemed never-ending, as his family continued to gather the exorbitant ransom demanded by the kidnapper. During this time, a man called the Greenlease residence multiple times to reassure Virginia that her son was alive. The kidnapper seemed to enjoy his twisted game, even as the family was plunged into despair. Over the course of a week, the family received a total of 6 ransom letters and 15 phone calls. They also agreed to comply with all the kidnapper's instructions. However, it would not be long before they realized that they had made a terrible mistake. By the evening of October 4, 1953, Robert had gathered the staggering sum of $600,000 in ransom money for the safe return of his son. The money was then placed in a duffel bag and taken to a bridge near Highway 40, just east of Kansas City. It was the largest ransom ever paid in American history at that time. Early the next morning, the kidnappers made contact with the Greenleases to confirm that they had retrieved the money and that Bobby would be returned within 24 hours. But as the day went on, there was still no word about the boy's whereabouts. The family waited anxiously for any news, but none came. The Greenleases were left to wonder if their son was alive or if they had been betrayed by the kidnappers. The suspense was unbearable, and it seemed like their worst fears were about to be realized. The next 24 hours would prove to be the most difficult and heartbreaking time in their lives. As the search for Bobby continued, An ex-con and cab driver named Joe Carr was about to play a crucial role in the investigation. He had been hired in the state of St. Louis by a man named Carl Austin Hall to be his personal chauffeur. From what Carr knew, Hall was new in town and was throwing money around like it was going out of style. Hall had rented an apartment, bought new clothes, and was living like a king. Carr was suspicious of Hall's behavior and decided to contact Joe Costello, his boss at the cab company. Costello was a man who had ties with the mob. And, in addition to this, he also had connections within the St. Louis Metropolitan Police Department. The sun had set on October 6, 1953, when Lieutenant Louis Shoulders and Patrolman Elmer Dolan received a tip from Costello about the man flaunting large amounts of money in St. Louis. They immediately rushed to the apartment where Hall was staying and apprehended him. Inside the room, the officers found 2 hefty metal suitcases filled to the brim with cash. It was an unbelievable sight. Hall was then escorted to the Newstead police station in North St. Louis, where the authorities interrogated him about the source of the money. At first, Hall was insistent they had done nothing wrong, but investigators soon began to put the pieces of the puzzle together. They suspected Hall was involved in the Greenlease kidnapping, given the amount of money he had on him. After some interrogation, Hall finally cracked and confessed to his role in the crime. But the most shocking revelation was yet to come. When asked about the whereabouts of Bobby, he revealed the boy was dead. Hall revealed they had not acted alone. He had a partner in crime, a woman named Bonnie Hetty. Together, they had hatched the plan to kidnap Bobby and extort his wealthy parents for a hefty ransom. With Hall's confession and a thorough background check, investigators were able to piece together the timeline of events and uncover the shocking details of how the kidnapping occurred. It was a web of deceit and betrayal with greed at the center of it all. Authorities found out that Hall came from a well-to-do family. He was the son of a lawyer. When his parents passed away, he inherited their 1,100-acre property in Pleasanton, Kansas, along with a substantial inheritance. However, Hall took a turn for the worse, as he went on a downward spiral, wasting his fortune, getting divorced, and falling into addiction. His life hit rock bottom when he was sent to the Missouri State Penitentiary for robbing a cab driver of a mere $38. While in prison, Paul dreamed of one big score that would set him up for life. And that's when he remembered the wealthy Greenlease family. You see, years prior, Paul had attended a military reform academy with Bobby's older, adopted half-brother, Paul. And that was when he had gotten to know about the family's wealth. In no time, Paul hatched a plan for a ransom payout. All that was left was to figure out just how to abduct the child. That's where Bonnie came into the picture. Bonnie was a woman of many contradictions. Despite being the beneficiary of a sizable inheritance from her father, she still indulged in prostitution and wild parties. She also seemed to have a thing for criminals. Her first husband was a bank robber who met his end in a hail of bullets from the police. But her second marriage didn't fare any better, and she ended up inheriting a house from the divorce settlement. It was in the bar of Hotel Robidoux, Missouri, that Bonnie crossed paths with Hall. Perhaps it was fate, or maybe just the universe aligning, but their chance meeting marked the beginning of a dark and twisted partnership. As the months passed, Paul gradually revealed his twisted scheme to Bonnie, and to his relief, she was all too eager to participate. And so, in the summer of 1953, Paul and Bonnie began trailing the Greenlease family like two hungry wolves, stalking their prey. They watched as the family went about their daily routines, hoping to find a weak spot to exploit. At first, they planned to snatch the Greenlease's daughter, Sue, but they soon realized that Bobby, the 6-year-old son, would be an easier target. They knew that they had to act fast if they wanted to make the big score. And with this, the stage was set for the kidnapping that shook the nation to its core. Bonnie had been the one that pretended to be Bobby's aunt and picked him up from school without raising any alarms. Following this, Bonnie and Bobby were then dropped off at a drugstore, where Hall was waiting. Paul took control of the situation, driving them across state lines to a vacant field in Overland Park, Kansas. Bonnie got out of the car and walked a short distance, leaving Bobby alone with Hall, who had no intention of keeping him alive. At first, Hall tried to take Bobby's life by using a piece of rope, but the rope was too short. Frustrated and angry, Paul punched Bobby in the face, knocking out one of his teeth. Bobby fell to the car's floor, and that's when Hall pulled out his .38 caliber pistol and shot him at point-blank range. Bobby did not survive for more than 30 minutes after he was abducted. After carrying out the evil deed, both Hall and Bonnie knew they had to get rid of the evidence. They drove to Bonnie's home in St. Joseph, Missouri, with Bobby's lifeless body wrapped in a plastic bag. They then carefully placed the bag in a pre-dug grave in the backyard. To conceal the stench of the dead body, they dumped a large amount of lime onto the bag. Hall then planted chrysanthemums over the grave, hoping to disguise it as a flower garden. Now, when Hall and Bonnie got their hands on the ransom money, they wasted no time in escaping across the state to St. Louis. Hall had purchased a pair of metal suitcases to stash the money. C and Bonnie also found an apartment on Arsenal Street, with a view of Tower Grove Park, and there, they celebrated their newfound fortune by drinking their hearts out. As the night wore on, Bonnie's drunkenness began to get the better of her and she dozed off. This was the perfect opportunity for Hall to put another plan he had into action. In the middle of the night, he put $2,000 in Bonnie's purse and slipped out of the apartment with the rest of the loot. Hall then took a cab to the Coral Court Motel in Marlboro, Missouri, and along the way, he picked up a prostitute named Sandra O'Day. He planned to use Sandra's help to divert the police's attention. Before his arrest, Paul arranged for her to fly to Los Angeles and mail a letter he had written to the Greenlease family. Doing this would have thrown the police off his trail. There are rumors that Sandra had also at some point caught sight of the ransom money Paul had been carrying about, and she had been the one that reported it to the police. It is, however, not clear if there is any truth in this. Hall is also believed to have bought 2 garbage cans and a shovel. He then drove a rental car to a spot along the Merrimack River in St. Louis County to hide the ransom money. But unfortunately for Hall, he didn't find a suitable spot to bury the cans, and so he kept the money with him. It wasn't long after this that he was arrested. After all these revelations got out in the open, police spring into action. Bonnie was tracked down and arrested in the apartment Hall had left her in. Both of them were indicted for capital murder and kidnapping, facing the full force of the law for their crime. On October 7, 1953, Bobby's remains were discovered, where they had been buried. 2 days later, on October 9th, a solemn funeral was held at St. Agnes Catholic Church, where loved ones and community members gathered to mourn the tragic loss of this innocent boy. Bobby was laid to rest with tears and heavy hearts, forever remembered as a victim of one of the most heinous crimes in American history. As for the 2 kidnappers, justice was swift for them. Because the crime had crossed state lines, the case became a federal one. And on October 30th, 1953, Paul and Bonnie appeared in a court and pleaded guilty to the charges against them. The jury took just an hour and 8 minutes to deliberate before recommending a death sentence. Less than a month later, on November 19, 1953, both Hall and Bonnie accepted their fates and made no attempt to appeal the verdict. They were executed together in the Missouri gas chamber on December 18, 1953, a mere 81 days after the kidnapping. At the time of their death, Bonnie was 41, while Hall was 34 years old. The aftermath of Bobby's kidnapping and murder was not without its twists and turns. Hall and Bonnie's execution may have brought closure to the Greenlease family, but it also brought to light a startling revelation. Now, when Hall was arrested, only half the ransom money was recovered. A total of $312,000 was unaccounted for. It was believed that Lieutenant Shoulders and Patrolman Dolan, the officers who arrested Hall, had stolen the missing money. However, they initially denied this, claiming that they had brought all the money with them to the police station. Eventually, they were federally indicted and convicted of perjury. On April 15, 1954, Shoulders was sentenced to 3 years in prison. Dolan, on the other hand, received a 2-year prison sentence. But the story didn't end there. In a shocking turn of events, Shoulders died in 1962. Once this happened, Dolan revealed to the FBI that Shoulders and Joe Costello, the mob boss, had actually stolen half of the ransom money. Dolan had been too scared to speak up earlier for fear of retribution. And it wasn't until Shoulders and Costello had passed away that he finally revealed the truth. For his cooperation, Dolan received a pardon from President Lyndon B. Johnson in July 1965. With this, Bobby's tragic tale came to an end. In 1983, 21-year-old Linda Reid had much to anticipate. She and her husband Robert, married for 2 years, were in the midst of building a house. To save for the home, the couple was living in a caravan on property owned by Robert's parents. They also planned to start a family. Linda worked as a sales associate in the jewelry department at McDonnell and East, a department store in the Pacific Fair Shopping Center in Broadbeach, Queensland. She was working on December 13, 1983 during the busy Christmas season and went on her lunch break at noon. Linda was a hard worker and a responsible employee, so her co-workers were concerned when she never returned. Linda's husband Robert was alarmed when she did not return home after her shift ended, and even more so when he learned she had never come back to work after her lunch hour. He began a frantic search for Linda at the shopping center and at other locations she was known to frequent before calling the police at 7 p.m. Linda's mother, Nancy, also tried to report Linda missing to the police, but they would not take the report as Linda had not yet been missing for 24 hours. Police would later learn Linda had gone to the Commonwealth Bank at 12:18 p.m., where she obtained a bank check so that she could pay some of her bills. A security guard reported seeing Linda drive out of the car park in her white Mazda a short time later. Where she was going and why she would leave the shopping center when she was due back at work at 1 o'clock was a mystery to her family and co-workers. Linda and her car would not be found until 3 days after her disappearance. Her Mazda, with Christmas presents she had already purchased still inside of it, was located along Malero Drive, in Bushland, approximately a 30-minute drive north of where Linda was last seen. In 1983, the area was remote, but today it has been developed extensively, and the location is not far from where the parking lot of Helensvale Town Center currently is located. The site was also less than 2 miles away from where Linda and Robert's home was being built. Linda's partially clothed body was found not far from her car, her head in a muddy creek bed. Her hands had been tied behind her back with a bikini top and a blue cord. Her face had been forced into the muddy creek bed with such force that mud and debris would be found inside of her lungs at her post-mortem examination. She had died either of drowning, smothering, strangulation, or suffocation, but the decomposition her body had undergone before it was found prevented any further degree of specification. Given how busy the shopping center Linda had vanished from had been on the day of her disappearance, authorities hoped to find witnesses among the hundreds of Christmas shoppers who had been shopping that day. They displayed Linda's car at the Pacific Fair Shopping Center as part of a display that also consisted of a mannequin, photographs, and other information in hopes of getting witnesses to come forward with tips. Several witnesses from the shopping center came forward, reporting seeing a baby-faced teenager with blonde hair in the car park where Linda's car had been parked. Other eyewitnesses who had not been at the shopping center on December 13th also came forward. They reported seeing a man hitchhiking along the Gold Coast Highway, less than a kilometer away from where Linda's body had been discovered on the day she disappeared. One man came forward reporting he had given a ride to a hitchhiker in his van a few days after Linda's murder after picking him up not far from where her body was found. His description of the hitchhiker matched that provided by other eyewitnesses. The hitchhiker had been carrying menthol cigarettes loose in his hand, and he did not have the package they came in. This detail caught the attention of investigators because an empty pack of Winfield menthol cigarettes had been found on the floor below the front passenger seat of Linda's car. Neither Linda nor her husband smoked. The witness's van was processed by police and an unidentified fingerprint was found on its passenger side window. Unfortunately, there was no match to it on file at the time. A major break in the case came in 1985 when a jailhouse informant claimed that a fellow prisoner had confessed to Linda's murder. 45-year-old Graham Steer told authorities that Craig McConnell had confessed that he and another man had abducted and killed Linda while he and Steer were both being held at the Bago Road jail. According to Steer, McConnell had told him that he and another man had been trying to steal a car from the car park at Pacific Fair and abducted and killed Linda after they feared she saw them. McConnell was serving 2 life sentences for 2 gruesome murders committed in Brisbane in 1984, both of which he committed with several accomplices. A detective described McConnell in court as the greatest argument for the death penalty there ever was. McConnell had confessed to both of the murders and plead guilty to them in court. McConnell claims that police tried to link him to Linda's murder and questioned him about it when he initially confessed to the 2 murders he did commit. He denied killing her at that time and continued to do so after Steer reported his alleged jailhouse confession. McConnell was brought to trial for Linda's murder in 1986, the admitted killer still denying any involvement in the case. A main witness against him died of heroin overdose just prior to the start of the trial, and the case against McConnell was based on Steer's statement and circumstantial evidence. According to Steer, McConnell had drawn him a map of the scene where Linda's body had been found, which authorities determined was accurate in its placement of a line of pine trees near the creek bed. Steer testified in court that McConnell had told him that Linda had warned him, "Rob will get you for this," as she was being driven to her death. Linda did call her husband Robert Rob as opposed to Bob or Robbie or any other nickname. Steer also claimed that McConnell had told him that he had eaten the sandwich Linda had packed for lunch and that it had cheese and pickles on it. Traces of cheese had been found inside of Linda's car when it was processed by the police. This circumstantial evidence was enough to convince the jury of McConnell's guilt, and he was found not guilty of Linda's murder due to a lack of evidence in October of 1986. "I never believed in going down for something I'd never done," McConnell said in court after the verdict was read, and before he was returned to prison to continue serving his 2 life sentences. Despite his acquittal, police presented evidence casting McConnell as a likely suspect in Linda's murder at an inquest into her case in 1987. Linda's death devastated her family, including her parents, Nancy and Oscar, and her brother Philip, and the passage of time did little to ease their pain. In a 2010 interview, Oscar revealed that he had been diagnosed with kidney cancer and feared he would die without knowing who was responsible for his daughter's murder. "I just want to know what happened to my beautiful daughter. I deserve that. It's always been terrifying to think we could never find out who killed Linda. I just want answers," he said. "It hurts to know Linda's killer is still out there, walking around, living life. Linda had her future taken away, and so did we." Unfortunately, Oscar did pass away before his daughter's case was solved. Linda's husband Robert could only sleep a few hours a night immediately after she was killed, staying awake for most of the night thinking about what had happened to his wife. Years after her death, he was still often crying himself to sleep. As a sign of his love for Linda and devotion to the life they had planned to build together, he made a vow to never have children with anyone else, giving up his dream of becoming a father. "I am destined to remain a bachelor. The vows I made were for Linda. The children we planned were Linda's and mine," he said at the 1987 inquest into Linda's murder. Linda's case was reopened in 2009 after police received an anonymous tip. A major break came in 2014 when the fingerprints from the witness van believed to belong to the man who hitchhiked away from the area of the crime scene were re-examined. Now, there was a match to them in the criminal database. This discovery did not result in an immediate arrest. Police instead launched an extensive renewed investigation to find further information and ensure that this suspect truly was Linda's killer. They re-examined over 150 pieces of evidence using the more advanced scientific techniques now available to them, digitized nearly 700 from the investigation, and re-interviewed more than 100 witnesses. The next major development in the case came when authorities found that a vaginal swab taken during Linda's autopsy was still in evidence. The sample was small and degraded, so it was sent to a specialized lab in New Zealand in 2017 in hopes that DNA could still be extracted from it. The lab was able to extract DNA from the sample, but found it to be from multiple people. The mixed sample therefore required further specialized testing. Ultimately, the lab determined that the sample from the swab was 70 million times more likely to be a mixture of DNA from Linda Reid, her husband Robert, and the suspect identified through his fingerprints than it was to be from Linda and Robert and any other individual. On August 22, 2018, nearly 35 years after Linda was killed, 51-year-old Troy James O'Mara was arrested and taken to court to be charged with her murder. O'Mara had been just 17 years old at the time of Linda's murder, and his physical appearance was close to that of the teenager witnesses had reported seeing in the Pacific Fair shopping center car park the day Linda disappeared. He had been living a transient lifestyle at the time. When he was arrested for Linda's murder, O'Mara was already serving a life sentence for a murder he committed just 18 months after Linda was killed. In July of 1985, 22-year-old Vanessa Joy O'Brien had been at a shopping center picking up her wedding bands for her upcoming marriage when O'Mara accosted her in the car park in broad daylight and forced her into her car at knife point. He made her drive to a remote area where he bound, raped, and killed her. Her body was later found in a garbage tip at Kipperong, north of Brisbane. While he was incarcerated, O'Mara had assaulted several guards and made attempts to escape, one of which was successful and resulted in him being out of custody for a full day. O'Mara initially denied killing Linda, but in March of 2021, he pleaded guilty to both her rape and murder in Brisbane's Supreme Court. He found Linda eating her lunch in her car on December 13, 1983, and forced her to drive out to the bushland where he bound, raped, and killed her. He claimed he had killed Linda because he felt like killing a woman at random that day, the same motive presented at his trial for Vanessa O'Brien's murder. Police believe O'Mara acted alone and that he did not know Linda prior to the day he killed her. Following O'Mara's plea, victim impact statements from husband and mother were read to the court. What can I say after 37 years? 1,000 tears, and many prayers wondering what my daughter went through in the last minutes of her life. Linda was a wonderful daughter, sister, and for a short time also a wonderful wife. My only regret is that Linda's father never lived to see this day. Linda's mother Nancy's statement read in part. O'Mara's defense lawyer told the court that his client hoped to one day be released from custody so that he could at least see and hopefully care for his elderly mother, who was now in a nursing home, and his cancer-stricken stepfather. He also told the court that O'Mara's violent behavior in prison had taken place in the 1990s and that he had been enrolled in educational programs since then. Crown Prosecutor Jody Wooldridge warned the court that O'Mara's guilty plea should not be taken as a sign of remorse. When he delivered his decision about O'Mara's sentencing the week after O'Mara entered his guilty plea, Justice Glenn Martin agreed with this assessment. On March 17, 2021, Justice Martin sentenced O'Mara to 20 years in prison for Linda's murder and a further 10 years for her rape. Justice Martin also ordered that O'Mara would be eligible for parole on July 11, 2022, just 16 months after he sentenced in Linda's case. Justice Martin argued that while O'Mara's crimes against Linda showed a high level of violence, sentencing could not be based on a strict mathematical calculation and that another life sentence for O'Mara would be, in his words, excessive. In making his decision, Justice Martin took into account the fact that O'Mara had legally been a minor when he killed Linda and current sentencing guidelines. If the defendant had committed the two offenses of murder in the recent times as an adult and he would be required to serve a minimum of 30 years in prison, he said in his decision. While he believed the nature of the crime merited a substantial sentence, he argued that because O'Mara will have been incarcerated for 37 years in July of 2022, it should be up to the parole board to determine if he is released. While Justice Martin's decision may be correct from a legal perspective, the possibility that O'Mara may be released so shortly after being sentenced for Linda's rape and murder does raise ethical concerns. The 37 years that have passed since Linda was taken from her family have not taken away the pain her loss caused them, but they have also not made Linda any less important to or loved by those who were closest to her. Linda's mother, Nancy, continues to visit her grave every week. On January 25, 2010, in the town of Kentwood, everything appeared routine as people went about their daily lives. However, at 6 p.m., an unexpected 911 call jolted the police department into action. The caller's voice was filled with terror, clearly identifying him as a frightened teenager in a desperate situation. Little did they realize that this alarming call was only the start of a disturbing and shocking sequence of events. The police, in an attempt to know the details about the events that had unfolded, started asking questions to him. Even in the chaos, the police didn't ignore the possibility of the victim attempting suicide, so they tried to confirm their doubt. As the call was getting intense, the police wanted to gather more detailed information, and for that, they wanted to speak to someone older to clarify what had actually happened. This seems strange considering he had previously mentioned that all were present, then somehow suddenly no one was at home. At that time, the person started to share a disturbing suspicion that he felt during his father's death. He also listened to the sounds of someone running from upstairs. after which he hurried upstairs only to be met with the scene of bloodshed and the lifeless body of his father. In the midst of their shock and confusion, a thought lingered in everyone's mind. If the father wasn't the one running, then who was and where had he gone? As the call ended, the police wasted no time and raced to the 58-100 block of Pine Vista Street in Kentwood. Upon arrival, they were greeted by Keyshawn Man, a 13-year-old boy who had bravely reached out to report his father's murder. With him, there were his two younger siblings, in which one was 8 years old and the other was 12 years old. Keyshawn's eyes were filled with a mix of fear and desperation as he provided the police with a detailed account of the horrifying events that unfolded. He explained how he heard the sound of a gunshot and quickly went upstairs and found his father, Germal Stokes, a 35-year-old man, lifeless. The crime scene was a chilling sight, with blood splattered in the room. The police swiftly secured the area and began examining Germal's body. They found a gunshot wound at the back of his head. Surprisingly, there were no other signs of violence or injuries on his body. This suggested that the killer's sole purpose was to end Germal's life without causing further harm or violence. After shooting him, the killer quickly fled the scene, believing that his task was completed. As the investigators carefully examined the wound, they noticed something peculiar. The size of a gunshot wound was larger than they typically encountered. This revelation suggested that the killer had fired the gun from an extremely close distance, almost at point-blank range. It became evident that Germal, unaware of the imminent danger, was engrossed in his work on the laptop at the dining room counter. This raised suspicions that the killer might have been familiar to him, as Germal didn't attempt to escape or defend himself. Usually, when confronted with such proximity, victims instinctively try to protect themselves. The stage was set for an investigation to uncover the truth behind this tragic and disturbing crime. The police carefully searched the entire crime scene and thoroughly examined the house, hoping to find any clue left behind by the killer. While searching the cupboard of Germal's room, they discovered 2 handguns. They believed that both guns belonged to Germal, but it appeared disturbing because one of them had a missing bullet and traces of gunpowder on it, suggesting it had been recently fired. The other gun was fully loaded and appeared untouched. This raised suspicions because if the killer had used the gun to kill Germal, it seemed unlikely he would have had enough time to put it back in the closet before leaving. Another questionable point arose when Keyshawn, during the 911 call, stated that Germal had no guns. It made the investigators wonder how Keyshawn could be sure whether or not Germal had guns. The gun was immediately sent for testing in hopes that there would be any clues that could give them hints about the predator. That's when, after learning about Germal's death, Keyshawn's mother, Lakeisha Man, who was Germal's fiancée, returned home. The police found it strange that the fiancée took a long time to come back home. Even though she was in the same town, as usually the spouses rush back if they get any information about their partner's demise. The investigators decided to question her, hoping to gather more information about Germal's past, his possible enemies, or any insights on who could be responsible for his murder. However, she claimed to know very little about his past. It was revealed that Keyshawn was not Germal's biological child, but rather his stepchild. The conflicting statements and confusing information puzzled the investigators, leaving them with a sense that something was being concealed. They recognized the need to delve into the family's background and gather more information. The police discovered that Keyshawn's mother had gone through a difficult divorce from his father, who was her first husband. However, the details about their relationship were not available to the public. As a single mother, she longed for love and respect, and that's when she found Germal Stokes. He became a companion and a father figure to her sons, including Keyshawn. They decided to take the relationship to the next level, and soon Lakeisha and her 3 sons moved in with Germal. On the other hand, Germal already had children with multiple women. He had a 4-year-old and a 9-year-old with one woman, a 10-year-old with another woman, and an 11-year-old and 12-year-old with yet another woman, as revealed in paternity and child support documents. State police records showed that Germal had a previous felony charged for carrying a concealed weapon back in 1993. Additionally, he had pleaded guilty to a misdemeanor charge for possessing a taser in 2003. Everything seemed to be going well in his new family life. Even though Keyshawn was not his biological child, Germal made an effort to establish a strong connection with him as a stepfather. He took on the role of a father figure, filling the void left by Keyshawn's absent biological father. There were no indications of any problems within the family, as there was no previous reports or information suggesting any issues or conflicts. The police investigation into the murder of Germal Stokes initially found no apparent motive or history that could explain the tragic event. They didn't find any clues or suspicious information about the family. Also, no one was a suspect, which clearly made it a mysterious case. However, Detective Mattis couldn't shake the feeling that there must be a reason behind every killing, even if it wasn't immediately evident. Despite initially ruling out the family's involvement, the investigators were unaware of the hidden secrets and darker truths lurking beneath the surface of their seemingly perfect family. The police shifted their focus towards finding someone who may have had a personal motive or grudge against Germal, possibly responsible for his murder. They started by questioning the neighbors, urging them to recall any unusual activity or if they saw anyone running away from the house on the evening of January 25, 2010. The neighbors, still shaken by the tragic event, admitted hearing the sound of a gunshot but did not witness anyone fleeing from the scene. The police extended their inquiries to Germal's friends and relatives, hoping for additional leads, but unfortunately, they hit a dead end. There were no apparent clues to follow, no evidence left behind, and no traces of blood or fingerprints at the crime scene, making it challenging for the investigators to suspect anyone. Finally, the results of the gun testing came back, uncovering a shocking truth that left everyone stunned. The fingerprints found on the gun used to kill Germal belonged to his own stepson, Keyshawn. It was an unexpected revelation that shook those who knew the family well. This revelation added a perplexing twist to the case, as Keyshawn had been the one to call the police in distress, reporting his father's shooting. They were now faced with the daunting task of understanding the motives behind this unexpected turn of events. The police began piecing together the puzzle, drawing connections regarding the 911 call made by Keyshawn. Initially, Keyshawn stated that they all were sitting on the couch at the time of the murder, which indicated that the family was present at the moment. But when police requested to speak with someone older, there was suddenly no one at home, which raised eyebrows. Based on these inconsistencies, the police reached a conclusion. They believed that on January 25, 2010, just before 6 p.m. when Keyshawn's mother was out, he saw it as the perfect opportunity to carry out his plan. Quietly, he retrieved his gun from the cupboard, shot his father, and then placed it back in its original location. In a state of panic and fear, he called the police to report his father's murder, unaware that his decision to put the gun back would serve as solid evidence against him. However, they were yet to discover the motive behind Germal's murder. The police returned to the house on Pine Vista Street in Kentwood and interviewed Keyshawn in a separate room to get a clearer account of what happened on the night of the murder. They asked him directly if he had killed Germal, and to their surprise, Keyshawn admitted that he had been playing with the gun. He explained that he accidentally pressed the trigger and got really scared, which led him to call the police. However, something didn't add up. During the 911 call, Keyshawn had denied the presence of any gun in the house. But now, after talking to him, it was clear that something was wrong. Why would he first deny having a gun and then admit to playing with it? The police believed that Keyshawn intentionally killed his father rather than it being a simple accident. However, considering his young age, they decided to seek the help of a professional psychiatrist to talk to him. They understood that as a child there might be underlying reasons or issues that led him to take such a drastic step. During the therapy session, he was asked about the reason behind killing his stepfather. And that's when the twist of the other side of the coin was revealed, as there was something more behind the happiness and the seemingly perfect family. Keyshawn opened up about the abuse and torment he and his family endured at the hand of Germal Stokes. He revealed that Germal would frequently beat him, his mother, and his siblings for even the slightest reasons or whenever he was in a bad mood. Keyshawn wanted to protect his mother and siblings from the ongoing torture and felt trapped with no way out. He believed that the only solution was to eliminate his stepfather, Germal. He shared with the therapist the horrifying instances of Germal abusing his mother, including sticking a finger down her throat. He also recounted the times when Germal would strike him and his brothers with a paint stick in their mother's absence. Keyshawn spoke about the time when Germal had choked him and how he managed to escape his clutches. Keyshawn's heart was consumed by hatred for Germal. Fueled by a deep love for his mother, he couldn't bear to see his mom suffer under Germal's abuse any longer. The pain of witnessing his mother's mistreatment became unbearable for Keyshawn, and he made the difficult decision to use one of Germal's own guns to end his life. This young boy had already endured so much in his life, perhaps due to some unknown reasons behind his mother's previous divorce. But this time, Keyshawn reached the breaking point, and it drove him to commit a truly horrific crime. The layers of emotions and motives made this tragic tale all the more intriguing. Considering Keyshawn Man's age of only 13 years old, it was decided to send him to the circuit court for trial in June 2010. This made him the youngest person in Kentwood County to be charged with murder and one of the youngest in the state to face such a trial. The Kentwood police detective in the courtroom revealed that Keyshawn had confessed to killing his stepfather, Germal Stokes. During the trial, Keyshawn admitted taking Germal's unregistered silver handgun from a closet. He was aware that the gun was loaded, having inspected it by removing and reinserting the clip. When Keyshawn's lawyer Fred Johnson asked if he approached Germal from behind, Keyshawn confirmed that he did. When Johnson posed the crucial question, "You understood that pulling the trigger could result in someone's death?" Keyshawn replied with another yes, clearly stating that the shooting was not accidental. In the courtroom, a close friend of Keyshawn from Park Ridge Academy, whose identity remained undisclosed due to his young age, stepped forward as a witness ready to unveil chilling revelations. He told the jurors that on January 25, 2010, Keyshawn bought a gun at high school. He showed the gun to him and also shared about his plans. In the court, a 21-page document from the Children's Trauma Assessment Center was presented. It contained details from Keyshawn's therapy sessions where he confessed to the crime and also revealed the traumatic reason behind it. According to the therapist, Keyshawn believed that killing Germal was the only way to protect himself and his family from severe abuse and potential harm. The therapist described Keyshawn's experience as a result of chronic exposure to extreme violence and a home environment that was sometimes chaotic and threatening. Even Keyshawn's mother acknowledged that there were moments when she feared Germal might kill her or her sons. Keyshawn's lawyer, Fred Johnson, expressed his belief that the reported domestic violence in the household played a crucial role in the shooting. However, he viewed the therapist's conclusions as subjective and possibly not strong enough for the trial. He emphasized that Keyshawn felt remorseful, scared, and concerned for his mother. Johnson stated that Keyshawn deeply regretted his actions and was aware of their impact on his mother. While the police and prosecutors questioned the assessment report's credibility, as they pointed out that there were no prior police or Child Protective Services calls regarding the abuse from the family. Police interviews indicated that Keyshawn's mother, Lakeisha Mann, was the one who enforced discipline in the household. Some of Germal's relatives wearing T-shirts that read "Beloved Melly," a nickname for Germal, didn't believe he had ever abused the children or Lakeisha Mann. Germal's uncle, Jose Moore, dismissed the claims as unfounded. Kent County Prosecutor Bill Forsyth stated that investigators couldn't establish a clear motive for the crime. The lack of a known reason behind the murder was unsettling for everyone involved. After carefully considering all the evidence and hearing the details of the case, Judge Daniel Zamita sentenced Keyshawn to serve the next 8 years until he turns 21 at the Muskegon River Youth Home, a juvenile for killing Germal Stokes. If Keyshawn completed this term, he would be released in 2018. However, there was also a possibility of facing a different sentence that could result in his transfer to an adult prison ranging from a minimum of 162 months up to life. Some relatives of the victim, Germal, expressed dissatisfaction with the proposed deal, feeling that the punishment given to Keyshawn was insufficient. Germal's sister, Taisha Stokes, stated that her brother was 35 years old and that she believed that Keyshawn should serve a sentence of 35 years in prison. She felt that justice was not being served. Germal's aunt, Annette Moore, also voiced her opinion that the ruling allowing Keyshawn to return to regular life was unfair. She believed that Keyshawn committed a serious crime and should receive an adult sentence, as she did not think he was mistreated. Moore voiced her dissatisfaction with the fairness of the current sentence, but the verdict had already been announced and couldn't be changed, so there was no other way but to accept it. However, after 3 years, on February 13, 2013, Keishan, now 16 years old, appeared in court for a progress evaluation during his time at the Muskegon River Youth Home. Reports indicated that he was doing better than average in the facility. While he was in a secure section, he was able to attend classes and counseling sessions. The administrators at the youth home assessed his performance as a 4 on a 1 to 5 scale and noted that he was making significant progress. They even observed that Keishan had been able to handle his anger, emotions, and frustrations in a positive manner, displaying appropriate coping skills. Keishan spoke briefly in court, expressing his gratitude for his family's support and apologized for his actions. He acknowledged that he made a significant mistake and emphasized that he was committed to learning from it. His attorney Johnson stated that Keishan was determined to do his best regardless of the circumstances. There were plans for Keishan to graduate from the youth home educational program as a junior and continue with college credit courses. On December 6, 2017, birthday balloons floated in the Kent County courtroom as 21-year-old Keishan Man celebrated his birthday and his release from the Muskegon River Youth Home. After over 7 years of being incarcerated for second-degree murder, Keishan was set free. Judge Daniel Zamitis, overseeing Keishan's progress through the periodic review hearings, decided to grant him his freedom. Addressing Keishan during the final hearing, the judge expressed confidence in his readiness to embark on a new chapter of success in the community. Friends and family members filled the courtroom, and Keishan shared an emotional hug with his mother, Lakeisha, when the judge made the announcement. Kent County Assistant Prosecutor Vicky Seidel praised Keishan as a positive example for other young people in the program. She described him as a role model for the prisoners and said he had fulfilled his responsibilities. Keishan had been studying through online courses at Mid-Michigan Community College for around 18 months, and his family members shared that he had aspirations to further his education, potentially at Grand Rapids Community College. In 2017, Keishan met with Germal Stokes' father to clear things up, and it went well. According to Kent County Probation Officer Dan Corey, Mr. Stokes expressed his desire for Keishan to live a productive life. Keishan acknowledged that it had been a long 7 years, but he made significant improvements in his life. He expressed gratitude for the opportunity to become a better person. Germal's aunt also forgave Keishan for his actions, understanding that he was just a young boy at the time. She recognized that Keishan acted out of fear and believed he deserved a chance to rebuild his life. What are your thoughts on this case? Do you think Keishan Man deserved a second chance? On November 1st, 1955, the Hop family spent the day harvesting sugar beets on their farm in Weld County, located east of Longmont and southwest of Platteville. Shortly after 7 p.m., while they were having dinner inside their farmhouse, they heard a powerful explosion that made every window in the house shake. Looking outside, they saw a ball of fire streaking across the sky, accompanied by the roar of engines. It appeared to be heading directly toward them, and initially, they feared it would strike their home before it veered off course. 18-year-old Conrad Hop and one of his brothers rushed out of the house, but lost sight of the flames as they moved behind some of the outbuildings on their farm. They hopped into Conrad's car, while their father and another brother took a farm truck. They drove through the fields towards the outbuildings, maneuvering around flaming debris. When they reached an irrigation ditch, Conrad parked the car, and he and his brother continued on foot. The engine noises and debris made it clear to them that the falling ball of flames must have been an airplane. Thus, they were not surprised when, illuminated by the car's headlights, they saw the back of an airplane seat as they got out. Conrad's brother climbed over a fence and ran towards the debris, instructing Conrad to return to the house for their coats. As Conrad turned back, he saw the front of the airplane seat he had previously seen from behind, along with a person still strapped in by their seatbelt. Within moments of the initial explosion, the Longmont Police Department received hundreds of calls. People who were close enough to have seen where the wreckage had gone down raced to the scene to try to help. The chief of police in Longmont, Keith Cunningham, dispatched every police officer and firefighter in town to the scene and called in the Colorado State Patrol. He had initially also ordered every ambulance in Longmont to drive out to the crash site. However, when the first police officers arrived on the scene, they radioed in that no ambulances would be necessary. No one had survived the crash. The downed plane was United Airlines 629, which had taken off at 6:52 p.m. from Stapleton Airport in Denver, en route to Portland, Oregon. 11 minutes after the DC-6B took off, the air traffic controllers in the tower at the airport noticed two bright white lights in sky to the north-northwest of the airport. The two lights fell towards the ground together, and the controllers then observed a flash as the two lights appeared to reach the ground. The controllers immediately began radioing all known air traffic in the area. United 629 was the only plane that did not respond. All 44 people on board the plane, 39 passengers and 5 crew members, were killed. The victims ranged in age from 13 months to 81 years. 13-month-old James Fitzpatrick II had been traveling with his mother Helen on their way to Japan to meet his father, who's serving in the military and had been obligated to leave for duty the day after his son's birth. 81-year-old Layla McLean lived in Portland and had been returning home after visiting her stepson in Connecticut. Alma Windsor had been traveling to Tacoma, Washington to help care for her son-in-law, who was suffering from polio. James and Sarah Dory were on their very first flight, traveling to Portland to see their son. Airman Second Class, Jesse Sizemore, was returning to his Air Force Base in Alaska after visiting his family in Alabama while on leave. 5 children lost both of their parents in the tragedy. A temporary morgue was set up at the National Guard Armory in Greeley, Colorado, north of the crash site, and bodies were taken there as they were located. 21 of the people who had been on the plane had their fingerprints on file, either because of their employment, naturalization, or military service, and the remaining individuals were identified by their friends or relatives, or by their personal effects. The Civil Aeronautics Board, along with personnel from United Airlines, investigated the crash with the full support of the FBI, who sent an expert from the FBI laboratory to the site the day after the crash at the board's request. Hundreds of people from the area showed up to the scene, many just staring in stunned silence. Others helped with the investigation, locating bodies and helping with their recovery. Unfortunately, along with the well-meaning individuals who came to see what they could do to be of service came the looters, who were seen stealing watches and other valuables off of the bodies of the victims. In response to this, the Weld County Sheriff's Office contacted the Colorado State College of Education in Greeley to recruit some of their students. Members of the Delta Psi fraternity came to stand guard around the field that contained the majority of the evidence from the crash, wearing their matching fraternity jackets so that they were identifiable to law enforcement. The full primary debris field of the crash covered 6 square miles. The tail portion of the plane had been found on a farm a mile and a half away from the main crash site, cleanly cut from the rest of the plane. The size of the debris field was an important clue for investigators. When a plane crashes while still in one piece, it results in a relatively small debris field. The fact that the debris field from Flight 6299 was so large and the multiple pieces of its fuselage were spread over such a wide area indicated that it had somehow come apart while it was still in the air. For some of the local residents who were present where the tail of the plane had come down and were familiar with explosives because of their agricultural applications, the cause of the crash was clear, thanks to the distinctive firecracker-like smell left behind by exploded dynamite. The area surrounding the crash site was mapped out, and an extensive and detailed grid search was carried out looking for pieces of the plane or items that had been on board it. Each item that was found had its location on the grid recorded before it was collected. The initial search area had to be expanded by several miles after hunters and other local residents reported finding parts of the plane and pieces of mail it had been carrying outside of the original parameters. The wreckage was taken to a warehouse at Stapleton Airport where a wood and wire mock-up of the central fuselage of the plane had been constructed so that the pieces collected from the crash site could be affixed to it, allowing investigators to reconstruct the plane and to study where and how severely the fuselage had been damaged. The investigation quickly began supporting the notion that United 629 had not been brought down accidentally. No fatigue cracking or structural feelings could be found, and records showed that the plane had received proper maintenance and that any concerns raised by pilots about the plane's operation had been addressed. Furthermore, the reconstruction of the fuselage showed that the recovered pieces from the plane grew progressively smaller as they reached a point in the number 4 cargo hold. The fragments closest to that spot were minuscule, and much of the area surrounding it was entirely missing, indicating that some sort of explosion had originated from that location. The scent of explosives lingered on pieces of the fuselage from the number 4 cargo hold, as well as on pieces of cargo known to have been conveyed in it. These pieces and items also had smudges on them that looked like soot. Chemical analysis of the soot-like deposits by the FBI laboratory revealed the presence of chemicals that will be left behind following the explosion of dynamite. Some of the examined items also had residue containing manganese dioxide, commonly found in dry cell batteries. 11 small pieces of material believed to have come from a 6-volt Eveready hotshot battery were found amongst the wreckage. Dynamite and batteries can be used in the construction of a bomb. As best as the Civil Aeronautics Board could determine from the various and placed the time of the explosion at 7:03 p.m. They believed that the second light the controllers saw was the result of the initial explosion causing a flare, which was part of the plane's standard equipment to ignite and separate from the plane. The explosion occurred 8 miles east of Longmont, Colorado, when the plane was approximately 10,800 feet above sea level, which was 5,782 feet above the terrain. The report and the chemical analysis was not available until November 13th, but on November 7th, 6 days after the crash, the Chief of Investigations of the Civil Aeronautics Board had officially announced that there were indications that sabotage had been involved in the crash of United 629. He further asked the FBI to open a criminal investigation into the case, which they formally began the following day. There were initial concerns that a labor dispute may have been the motivation behind the bombing. Light engineers had gone on strike, and Samuel Arthur, a married father of 2 who worked as a pilot for United, was brought on to serve as United 629's flight engineer at the last minute. Brad Bynum and his pregnant wife Carol were only on the doomed flight because their original flight had been canceled due to the strike. They were on their way home to Oregon from Amarillo, Texas, where they had been visiting Brad's family to celebrate their first wedding anniversary. In addition to following up on the strike, the FBI began investigating everyone who had been on the plane, everyone who had reservations for the flight but canceled them just prior to it taking off, and everyone who still had. They looked into not only the passengers who boarded the plane at Denver, but everyone who had been on any part of the day's flight. Investigators were looking for indications that a passenger had brought the bomb onto the plane or that one of the passengers had been targeted, with whoever made the bomb disguising their murder with the larger tragedy. Insurance fraud was considered a possible motive for bringing down the plane. In 1955, commercial aviation was relatively new, and consumer confidence in flying was not as strong as it would ultimately become. It was therefore not unusual for people traveling by plane to purchase travel insurance before their trip. It would take time for authorities to search the records of every insurance company that offered flight insurance, but some policies on passengers of United 629 were quickly located. It was relatively common at the time for airports to so passengers could purchase a policy to provide for their loved ones should their plane crash just before boarding. The passenger would insert a few quarters into the machine, which would then dispense the policy documents. The passenger would then fill out and sign the paperwork and deposit it through a slot into the same machine to be mailed out before they boarded their flight. Stapleton Airport had such a vending machine. 17 passengers aboard United 629 when it crashed had purchased these policies. The amounts provided by the policies ranged from $6,250 to the maximum amount offered, $62,500. Which would be equivalent to more than $600,000 in 2021. An unlucky occurrence in Chicago proved fortuitous for investigators in Colorado as they tried to identify the source of the bomb. United Flight 69 was a daily scheduled flight from New York to Seattle that made stops in Chicago, Denver. On the day of the crash, a baggage handler in Chicago lost his keys. He believed he lost them while loading Cargo Bay 4 on United 629. So the bag of Chandlers in Denver were contacted and asked to search that cargo bay for the lost keys. When the plane arrived at Stapleton Airport, everything was removed from Cargo Bay 4, with all the cargo not remaining in Denver being placed in other cargo holds so that the bay could be thoroughly searched. The baggage handlers never found the set of keys. As such, the only baggage in Cargo Bay for when the plane went down had originated in Denver, meaning the bomb had not been loaded onto the plane in New York or Chicago. Only a few pieces of passenger luggage had been put into the cargo bay at Denver. When they questioned the families of the victims, the FBI asked for a description of the items the passengers had been traveling with and the type of luggage they had carried them in. One of the bags known to have been loaded into Cargo Bay 4 was a large tattered suitcase reinforced with cables that belonged to a woman named Daisy King. 53-year-old Daisy owned a drive-in restaurant in West Denver and was traveling to visit her daughter Helen in Alaska for the holidays. Daisy had been required to pay a fee when she went to check her bag upon her arrival at the airport, as a suitcase was 37 pounds over the airline's weight limit. Her family believed that the ammunition she was traveling with so that she could hunt caribou during her time in Alaska was a major reason why the bag had been so heavy. Almost none of the items Daisy's family believed to have been in the suitcase were found amongst the debris, and only the smallest of fragments of the suitcase itself were located. This suggested that Daisy's suitcase had been the piece of luggage closest to the explosion, potentially because it had contained the bomb. Numerous items belonging to Daisy King were located at the crash site. However, they were found on or near her body and were small and important enough that it made sense that she would want to keep them with her during her flight rather than put them in her checked luggage. The items included $1,000 in traveler's checks, a list of addresses, personal letters, keys to and receipts for safety deposit boxes, and newspaper clippings about various members of her family. The clippings concerning Daisy's son, Jack, however, were not pleasant pieces of memorabilia, as they did not describe his accomplishments, but rather his criminal past. John Gilbert Graham, known as Jack, was born on January 23, 1932, the second of his mother Daisy's children. He had an older half-sister named Helen from his mother's first marriage. At the age of 16, Jack struck out on his own, forging his identity documents to say that he was older so that he could join the Coast Guard. He served from April of 1948 until January of 1949, and he was last stationed at the Coast Guard installation at Groton, Connecticut. He was honorably discharged after his true age was discovered, but a notation in his records shows that he had been without leave for 63 days during his time of service, meaning he was AWOL for almost a quarter of the time he was with the Coast Guard. Jack eventually returned to Denver and took a job as a payroll clerk at a manufacturing company. In March of 1951, he stole a checkbook from his employer and began forging the company owner's signature and cashing the checks at various businesses throughout Denver, ultimately stealing more than $4,000 from the company. He to leave town. Jack's whereabouts during the next several months are unknown, but he ultimately ended up in Lubbock, Texas, where he was arrested on September 11, 1951 for hauling whiskey in violation of Texas laws. Jack was only arrested after he ran a roadblock driving over 100 miles an hour and was shot at by authorities. He was then convicted on the bootlegging charge and spent 60 days in county jail. He was then released to Denver County District Attorney's Office to face a forgery charge related to the bad checks and money he stole from his former employer. He was convicted of the forgery charge in November, but was only given a sentence of 5 years probation after his mother paid back $25,100 in restitution, and he agreed to pay back the remaining balance in installments. Jack made his monthly restitution payments and visits to the probation officer consistently over the following few years. However, Jack's probation reports state that he did not appreciate the seriousness of the charge he had been convicted of, and that his mother was highly overprotective of him. Jack worked mainly as a heavy equipment mechanic and received his high school diploma after passing the entrance examination for the University of Denver. He was only a student at the university briefly, leaving the school with no degree, but with a wife, Gloria. Jack's stepfather, Earl King, died of heart disease on October 16, 1954, leaving his mother, Daisy King, a substantial estate consisting largely of property and various business interests. Following her husband's death, Daisy went to Marco Island, Florida to tend to a home she now owned there. In February of 1955, Daisy returned to Denver because Jack and his wife, Gloria, had just welcomed their second child. Daisy then purchased a home on West Mississippi Avenue, which was primarily to be used as the family home for Jack, Gloria, and their children. Daisy did create a basement apartment in the home, where she would reside when she was not traveling to check up on her various business interests. That May, she opened the Crown A Drive-In restaurant on South Federal Boulevard and hired her son to manage it. The FBI had interviewed 100 of connected to the passengers of United 629, searching for potential motives to harm one of them. This included friends, co-workers, and neighbors of Daisy King. At least 3 different people had told the FBI to investigate Jack Graham. While Daisy had provided Jack with a home and a business, the relationship she had with her son grew worse as their lives became more intertwined. Witnesses reported that Jack and Daisy fought like cats and dogs over business matters and that Jack may have been stealing money from the drive-in. Insurance money seems like an obvious motive for Jack to kill his mother. He initially told the FBI that he had purchased 3 flight insurance policies, all paying out the smallest amount offered at the airport. He, his half-sister Helen, and his aunt each were the beneficiaries of one of the policies. However, the FBI would discover the duplicates of these policies hidden. Additional, the third, which listed Jack Graham as the beneficiary, was in fact for $37,500. Jack was also suspected of perpetrating other, smaller insurance schemes in the months before the plane crash. In July, his new Chevrolet pickup truck was hit by a train just after Jack jumped out of it. Jack claimed that the vehicle had stalled on the tracks. He tried to convince his insurance company to pay him cash for the damages, but they refused, only paying for the repairs directly. Then in early September, an explosion at the Crown A resulted in over $1,200 worth of damage. Gas line, which ultimately resulted in the explosion once the accumulation of gas inside the restaurant reached the pilot light of its water heater. A few dollars worth of change had also been taken from the register, and several pieces of furniture had been broken prior to the explosion. Authorities were suspicious of the incident, but the insurance claim was ultimately paid and no arrests were made. The restaurant had had that Jack may have placed something in his mother's suitcase, a fact which he himself had not revealed in his initial interview with agents when he claimed to have no knowledge of what was in her luggage beyond the ammunition she was bringing for caribou hunting. Jack's wife Gloria told the FBI that on the day her mother-in-law boarded her flight, she had seen Jack walk into their home with a gift-wrapped package that was approximately 18 inches in length, 14 inches in width, and 3 inches in depth. Gloria assumed that the gift was a tool set used for making jewelry. Jack had told her, and one of their neighbors, that he wanted to purchase such a set of tools for his mother as a Christmas present because she enjoyed crafting items like small shells into pieces of jewelry. Gloria did not see her husband give the gift to his mother, but assumed he had, as she had seen him take it to the basement where Daisy had been packing for her trip. The FBI grew increasingly suspicious of Jack Graham as the investigation went on. On Saturday, November 12th, 11 days after the plane crash, they called him and asked him to come to their office the following day to identify some of the small fragments of luggage believed to have come from his mother's bags. Jack and Gloria Graham arrived at the office the following day around noon, still dressed in their Sunday baths from church that morning. After they identified the luggage fragments, agents informed Gloria that they wished to speak to her husband further about the investigation, but she could return home to her 2 young children, which she did. The FBI agents then questioned Jack about the Christmas gift for his mother. Jack claimed that he had never purchased the tool set he had been talking about because he had learned that the set would not work for Daisy's specific needs. Seemingly unaware that his wife had seen him with the wrapped package and told the agents about it, he claimed that Gloria must have just assumed he purchased the set simply because he had previously discussed it with her. Jack was also questioned about the travel insurance policies on his mother's life purchased at the airport just prior to her boarding the plane. Jack claimed that he must have thrown the policies in the trash at the airport because he had never received the policy naming him as the beneficiary in the mail as he should have. FBI agents then went to the Graham home and obtained a signed statement from Gloria specifically about the details of her previous statement that did not line up with the information her husband was now providing. Jack was then presented with this statement and told that, based on the discrepancies between his statements and his wife's, he was being considered a suspect in the bombing of United 629. Miranda rights and the Miranda warning as we know them today would not exist for more than another decade after Jack Graham's interrogation, but he was advised that he did not have to speak with the FBI agents and that any statements he did make could be used against him in court. He was also told that he had the right to request an attorney at any time, but he never chose to. Jack did sign a statement saying he would take a polygraph examination and another consenting to a search of his home, property, and automobiles. The searches were carried out immediately. Found hidden in a chest in a bedroom. Agents also found a small roll of copper wire with yellow insulation, consistent with the type used in detonating primer caps, in the shirt pocket of Jack's work clothes. FBI agents spent the next several hours interviewing Jack, sending out other agents to investigate what he said, and then presenting him with evidence disproving what he had told them. This cycle repeated several times. When Jack was presented with the evidence from the FBI laboratory about the fragments of wreckage recovered from the crash scene, Jack confessed, but not to the bombing of the plane. Rather, he admitted to causing the explosion at the drive-in and to intentionally letting his truck be struck by a train. Just after midnight, Agent James R. Wagoner told Jack, "You've been lying to us all night. We are going to charge you with this crime. Why not make it easy for us?" Jack charged you with this crime. Why not make it easy for us? Jack replied simply, "Where do you want me to start?" and confessed to building the bomb and causing the crash of United 629. He would sign a 5-page statement confessing to his involvement. Between the statement Jack made that night, later confessions to prison psychiatrists, and statements made by Gloria Graham, we have a fairly detailed account of Jack's actions in the hours just before and just after the bombing. Jack had been working as a mechanic on the graveyard shift following the explosion at the drive-in, so he had spent most of the day of November 1st, 1955 sleeping after a shift at work. He woke up just before 5 p.m. and began preparing to take his mother to the airport for her flight. Because she would be in Alaska for so long, Daisy was going to store her 1955 Chevrolet at the Denver Motor Hotel while she was away. Jack sent his family with Daisy in her car, telling his mother to leave her luggage for him to load into his car before he followed. After his family left in Daisy's car, Jack opened his mother's suitcase. He removed her bathrobe and a quilted lavender bag, which held Jack's wedding pictures, and 2 antique brass flasks from the suitcase. In place of those items, he placed a bomb he had previously constructed, which was made of 25 sticks of dynamite, 2 blasting caps, a timer, and a 6-volt battery. 1 stick of dynamite would have been enough to bring down the plane his mother was about to board. He included 2 blasting caps, just in case one failed. Jack then loaded the luggage into his own car and began driving to meet his family. They got into his car at the Motor Hotel and began driving to the airport. Daisy thought it took her son too long to finally meet them at the Motor Hotel and was concerned he was going to make her miss her 6:30 flight. When they reached the airport, Jack dropped Daisy, Gloria, and his children off at the terminal before going to park his car. As Jack was taking his mother's luggage out of the car, he reached into his mother's suitcase and turned the dial on the timer connected to the bomb. He brought the suitcase into the airport and carried it to the check-in desk for his mother. Daisy was upset to learn the bag was 37 pounds over the airline's weight limit, and she would be required to pay a $27 fine in order to have it loaded onto the plane. She briefly considered removing some items from the suitcase and having them shipped to Alaska, but Jack convinced her that she would need all of her things upon her arrival. Daisy paid the fee, and the suitcase was loaded into Cargo Bay 4 of United 629. After purchasing flight insurance at the airport's vending machine, the family went to the boarding gate. There, Gloria Graham recognized Sally Schofield, with whom she had attended a Methodist church camp a few years earlier. 24-year-old Sally was less than a month away from her wedding to a pilot for United. Sally also worked for the airline as a stewardess, but was off-duty and traveling as a passenger that day. She was traveling with another off-duty stewardess, Barbara Cruz, to Barbara's hometown of Seattle. Jack, Gloria, and their children watched Daisy board her plane and went to the observation deck to watch it take off. They then went to dinner in the airport coffee shop. After he ate, Jack went to the bathroom and threw up. As they were leaving, they overheard an employee mention something about a plane crash. When they asked him about it, he had no further information beyond the fact that he had heard that the plane had been flying for United. Jack called the airline after he arrived home to confirm his mother's plane had in fact gone down. He was the first relative of a United 629 passenger to inquire about the fate of the flight. An airline official informed him that United 629 had in fact crashed and that all on board, including his mother, were presumed dead. "Well, that's the way it goes," Jack said in response to the news. The United agent called the Graham home back half an hour later to obtain more information about King. Gloria Graham answered the call. When the agent asked to speak with her husband, she told him Jack was unavailable. He had gone to bed right after being told of his mother's death and was already sound asleep. Based on the nature of Jack's criminal history and his admitted propensity for insurance fraud, Money would appear to be his obvious motive for bombing the plane. In addition to the insurance policy, Jack also stood to inherit a large portion of his mother's estate upon her death. Daisy's estate was valued at between $100,000 and $150,000, which will be equivalent to $1 million to $1,500,000 today. While the money he would receive if his mother died almost certainly played a role in his decision to bomb the plane, he also had a personal motive to want to kill his mother. When describing watching the plane take off, knowing that his mother and everyone else on board it would soon be dead, he told the FBI agents, "I watched her go off for the last time. I felt happier than I ever felt in my life." While Daisy was involved in almost every aspect of Jack's life at the time of her death, she had not consistently been active in her son's life, a fact which caused Jack a great deal of distress as a child and resulted in years of resentment towards his mother. Jack's father, William Graham, had been Daisy's second husband. He died when Jack was 3 years old, although he had separated from Daisy more than a year before his death. Jack had been sent to live with his grandmother following his parents' separation so that his mother could take what work she could find during the Great Depression, and his half-sister Helen was taken in by a religious school. After Jack's grandmother passed away, he was sent to the Clayton College for Boys, an orphanage for fatherless boys in Denver. While the orphanage was considered progressive at the time and offered the boys who lived there an education and some degree of freedom, Jack wanted to be reunited with his mother, Daisy. Daisy's financial situation improved greatly in '41 when she married a wealthy rancher named Earl King. Jack ran away from the orphanage to try to reunite with his mother several times, but she would always send him back. Jack was allowed to spend holiday breaks with his mother at his stepfather's ranch, but would always be sent back to the orphanage when classes started again. The amount of time and money Daisy would put into her relationship with her son as he got older seemingly did little to make up her absence from his younger life. The number of lives he would take in his pursuit of revenge against his mother meant nothing to Jack. Jack was aware that 50 or 60 people could be carried on the plane. But the number of people to be killed made no difference to me, he would later tell prison psychiatrists. Could have been a 1,000. When their time comes, there is nothing they can do about it. In 1955, there were no federal laws prohibiting the bombing of a commercial aircraft. The only charge the FBI could bring against Jack Graham was sabotaging an aircraft during peacetime. On November 14, 1955, a special agent from the FBI filed a complaint before the U.S. Commissioner in Denver charging Jack Graham with sabotage. Jack could not make his bond and remained in custody. However, this charge carried a maximum sentence of 10 years, hardly an acceptable prison term for a bombing that took 44 lives. Therefore, federal authorities agreed to turn Jack over to the state of Colorado. On November 17th, he was charged in the state court with the murder of his mother and held without bond. While this single murder charge did not address the full scope of the crimes Jack committed, it would make him eligible for the death penalty, were he successfully convicted of it. The bombing of United 629 did not go exactly as Jack had planned. The plane had taken off 22 minutes later than scheduled because it was waiting for a passenger. Harold Sandstead, President Eisenhower's Deputy Secretary for Public Health, was booked on United 629. He had been traveling to make a speech at the University of Oregon. His flight into Denver from Washington, D.C. had been delayed, so United 629 waited in Denver until he arrived and made his connection. If United 629 had taken off on schedule, the timer would have gone off and the bomb would have exploded while the plane was over the Medicine Bow Mountains. United had lost another plane to a crash on October 6, 1955, when United 409 crashed into the mountain range in the past decade. If the plane had gone down in the mountains, the crash site may not have been accessible until the following spring, compromising the evidence and potentially obscuring the true cause of the crash. The ongoing investigation after Jack's arrest would show that he had begun making preparations to bring down United 69 within days of the most recent United crash in the mountains. Jack had approached the owner of an electrical company asking for a job, which he said he would work for only a nominal amount of money in hopes of gaining more experience in the electrical field. The owner agreed to employ for a week, and when that term was over, Jack asked him several questions about how to obtain a timer that worked with a battery and did not go beyond 2 hours. The owner advised him on what to ask for at the appliance store. Authorities were also able to track down the locations where Jack had purchased the various components of the bomb, like the dynamite, and the merchants were able to identify Jack or pick his picture out of a lineup as the person they had sold the materials to in October of 1955. Investigators also learned that Jack had ranted to a credit manager from Chevrolet about how easy it would be to blow up a plane and how he had observed the baggage handling operation at Stapleton Airport and believed getting a bomb on board a plane would be a simple endeavor. He made these statements after being unable to pay the $50 deductible on his insurance policy following his truck being hit by a train. In the incident, he would later admit to have orchestrated intentionally. He told the credit manager he could not make the payment because his bank account was a joint account with his mother and the funds were tied up. According to Jack's half-sister Helen, following the plane crash, Jack had made jokes both to her and to Gloria Graham about the shotgun shells in their mother's luggage going off inside of the plane and everyone on board jumping around to avoid them before the plane went down. Such insensitive remarks from her half-brother had not been shocking to Helen. However, as for the past several years, she had not wanted to be around Jack because she knew him to be mentally unstable and violent. Jack had lived with Helen and her husband for a time in Alaska after he found a job there, and he had relayed to her one day that after he grew frustrated because he was having difficulty loosening a bolt from a piece of equipment, he had instead found a stick of dynamite and simply blown it off. Jack had also attacked Helen on 2 separate occasions. He had tried to attack her with a hammer before she was able to lock herself in a room to get away from him on one, and he had knocked her down on the other, kneeing her in the chest with such force that it damaged her ribs. Just a few months before the plane crash, Helen had witnessed Jack exhibit similar violent and irrational behavior towards his wife Gloria. Jack had gone to sleep, and Gloria was not with him when he woke up. She had been playing cards with Helen and Daisy. When Jack found her, he hit her several times and his mother feared that he would strike her as well. While Jack confessed to the bombing, he quickly changed his story, recanting the confession in an interview that appeared in the Rocky Mountain News just 4 days after he made it. Jack was arraigned on the murder charge in Denver District Court on December 9, 1955 and entered pleas of innocent and innocent by reason of insanity before, during, and after the alleged commission of the crime. However, only pleas of innocent and innocent by reason of insanity at the time of the alleged crime were accepted by the court. Jack was then sent to a psychiatric hospital where he was ordered to be examined by 4 psychiatrists, 2 chosen by his defense team during one of these evaluations. He maintained his innocence and provided a bizarre explanation as to why he had said he was responsible for bombing United 629. Jack claimed that he had gotten the idea to confess to bombing the plane with dynamite from a picture hanging in the office he had been in at the time. The picture showed FBI agents digging up a hidden supply of explosives after apprehending Nazi saboteurs in Florida during World War II. All 4 psychiatrists found Jack to be legally sane. Jack was then returned to the Denver County Jail, where he remained for several weeks and was a model prisoner. However, he then attempted suicide on February 10, 1956, and was transferred to the psychiatric ward at Colorado General Hospital. During his time at hospital, Jack reverted back to taking credit for the bombing of United 69. He was very open with his psychiatrist about his guilt in the crime, his motives for committing it, his feelings or lack thereof about killing so many people, and the details of how he had carried out the bombing. Jack did not change his plea in court, however, and his trial began in April of 1956. The case set a Colorado state record for the number of jurors examined for a trial, with 231 jurors questioned before the 12 jurors, 7 men and 5 women, were selected. A major contributing factor to this large number of potential jurors was the extensive coverage the case had in the media, which had led to many people already a firm opinion about Jack's guilt or innocence. Public interest in the case was still high when the trial began, with members of all forms of the media making special preparations to cover it. The trial was one of the first in the United States in which television cameras were allowed inside of the courtroom, although they were not allowed to broadcast live. Every day, hundreds of people spent hours waiting outside the courtroom clamoring for a seat inside. The guard at the door did save 1 seat every day for a young woman who arrived promptly at 9 a.m. each day of the trial. She was the widow of one of the pilots of United 629. The prosecution called more than 80 witnesses and entered 174 exhibits into evidence. Jack's initial 5-page confession was read aloud in court, and witnesses provided testimony about his contradictory statements and incriminating purchases. Members of the ground crew at the airport confirmed that the plane had been in proper working order at takeoff, and members of the Civil Aeronautics Board, representatives of the Douglas Aircraft Corporation, and employees of United Airlines detailed the collection and preservation of the pieces of wreckage from the crash site, and how they had determined where the explosion had originated. An expert from the FBI laboratory testified to the laboratory's identification of the chemical residue and battery fragments. The prosecution's case was detailed and thorough. The defense case was far less robust, and they only had 8 witnesses to call. With few other options, Jack's lawyers did attempt to have evidence and testimony from the FBI excluded from the trial. On the 9th day of the trial, they were granted a hearing in federal court, during which they argued that the evidence provided by the FBI had been illegally obtained because Jack had not been advised of his rights before he was questioned and his property was searched. FBI agents testified and proved his innocence. He ultimately did not testify at the trial. On May 4, 1956, the jury returned with a verdict after deliberating for just 69 minutes. They found Jack Gilbert Graham guilty of his mother's murder. He was sentenced to die in the gas chamber. Jack's conviction did little to ruin the calm and disinterested mood he had maintained throughout his trial. It also failed to inspire any pity for his victims in him. Following his conviction, he told a reporter from Time magazine, "As far as remorse for those people, I can't help it. Everybody pays their way and takes their chances. That's just the way it goes." Jack had seemingly no interest in delaying his execution, but his attorneys filed motions and appeals on his behalf against his wishes. When they tried to get Jack a new trial, Jack took the stand and told the judge he did not want a new trial or for his conviction to be reviewed by the state Supreme Court. Jack's execution was stayed after his attorneys filed another appeal without his consent, but the Colorado Supreme Court upheld Jack's conviction and set his execution for January of 1957. While the bombing of United 629 would have a profound and devastating impact on the loved ones its passengers left behind for the rest of their lives, the life of the man responsible for it would end just 14 months after the plane was brought down. On Friday, January 11, 1957, Jack was taken to the gas chamber at the Colorado State Penitentiary. He was stripped down to his underwear, had a black mask placed over his eyes, and was strapped to a steel chair. Warden Harry Tinsley said God bless Jack after he strapped him to the chair, and Jack responded with thank you. After the gas was released into the chamber, Jack began coughing and then screaming before succumbing to the gas. He died 11 minutes after the gas entered the chamber, his death mirroring the deaths of his 44 victims who were senselessly killed when an explosion brought down their plane 11 minutes after it took off. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the depths of unsolved mysteries. Cold cases not only challenge our understanding of the past, but also ignite our curiosity and determination for answers. Remember to subscribe to stay updated on our latest investigations. And if you have any information regarding the cases we've covered, don't hesitate to reach out. Together, we can shed light on the shadows of the past and bring closure to those who seek it. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay curious, and never stop seeking the truth.